Well, this is an exciting time, as we all know. And in the US, I've started to give a talk to plant pathologists about moving to one name. And I can tell you that most plant pathologists haven't even heard about this. The reaction is shock. Many of them have become used to using two names, but some of them are also very pleased and say, it's about time we did this. So I always feel good when they come and tell me that. But they are, of course, worried that they will lose their favorite scientific names. And so I do think we should take their interests into account as we decide which names to use. And also, as I said yesterday, and a lot of this has been said yesterday, we always need to keep in mind the difference between nomenclature and taxonomy. When I read some of the papers about this issue, I see how we get those two issues confused. And nomenclature is simply which name will apply to a group of organisms, related organisms. And the taxonomy is how we circumscribe the genera and species. So I think we always need to make that distinction in these discussions. And of course, when we're talking about nomenclature, what is crucial is the type species. I'm talking mostly about genera. So when we, it's black here in front of me. Oh well. So as we, let's see. So it's essential that we know what the type species is of the genera that we're talking about. And of course, we won't know all of the type species and what they are. We won't have DNA for all of them. But I think we have to move ahead anyway. We've done this for years. We kind of muddle along, and that's just where we are. The science will advance, and we'll get new knowledge, and then we might have to make more name changes. But that's the way of life. Another caveat that I think we should keep in mind is that we sometimes confuse morphology with phylogeny. So my example of that is the name Fusarium. When you hear the name Fusarium, we think of these canoe or banana-shaped conidia that are sort of have that narrowing at the apex. And that's Fusarium in the small letter sense. So that's a Fusarium-like conidium. But the genus Fusarium now is defined in a very strict sense, at least in my view, to correspond with the type species, which is Sambucinum, and the group of species that have gibberella teleomorphs. So that's a very strict sense of Fusarium. And yet we can still use the term Fusarium-like as a shorthand for the morphology. So I think that's another point that we should keep in mind, not to confuse a name that is a morphology versus a name that is a phylogenetic entity. So we can use terms like Fusarium-like, Nectria-like, Acremonium-like. So I think as quickly as possible, we need to propose the lists of genera that should be conserved if we, to preserve important plant path names, important industrial fungi. And we need to direct plant pathologists toward websites where they can find out their accurate names of fungi. I think most plant pathologists don't care at all about nomenclature. They just want to know what name to use. So, assuming, this was mentioned yesterday, assuming that we knew everything, close your eyes, we know everything about the phylogeny of all the fungi and all their names. So if we did know that, there would be a one-to-one correlation between anamorphs and teleomorphs. Of course, we don't know, we don't have that, but we have to move ahead anyway. So, determining the correct scientific name is a two-step process. It's based on the principle of priority. So first we have to determine which genus has priority, and then we have to compare species epithets to find out which epithet is the oldest one and use that one. Pedro, you have a funny look on your face. Oh, okay. Okay, so now I'm going to go through examples in the Hypocreales. and the Diaporthales to see what happens if we apply the principle of priority and to look at which genera we might want to consider for conservation. And I developed a list of criteria based on some of the literature and my thoughts. But we certainly can add more ideas to what kinds of factors we should take into account when considering which genera and species to conserve. So here are some of them. The number of species in each genus. So if we pick, if the genus that has priority has just a few species and the counter genus has many, then we'll end up making lots of name changes. And a corollary to that, is the number of species in each genus. So those two criteria are definitely linked. Then hits in Google and Google Scholar, whether the generic concept is well defined. Then I think it would be good to conserve the names of commonly known plant pathogens. And if they're about equal, which some of them are, would we favor the teleomorph? Should we make it an egalitarian process and have a website where everyone can vote? Do you have to have any qualifications to vote? Or anything else? So let's see how this works. In the Hypocreales, I just started through the Hypocreales. So Bionectria and Clonostachys, these are pairs of genera. They're the same, they're synonyms. So which genus would we use? Basing it on the principle of priority. Clonostachys, very good. So the first question to ask is, are these two genera really synonyms? Are the types really congeneric? So the type of Bionectria is Tonduzi. The type of Clonostachys is Ericaria, which is based on a very old epithet Penicillium roseum, which is the anamorph of Bionectria ochroleuca. Well, so the question is the type species of Bionectria, does it have a Clonostachys anamorph? And according to Schwar's 1999 monograph, the answer is yes, it does have a Clonostachys anamorph. So these two genera are synonyms. So which name should we use? Clonostachys is oldest, or we could conserve Bionectria. So looking at some of those criteria, well, there are 42 species of Bionectria, there are 67 species of Clonostachys. Looking at Google and Google Scholar, there are, you get a higher number of hits for Clonostachys. Looking at number of name changes, now I can tell you this is a rather tedious kind of exercise. Looking at these species, and I'm not going to go through them all, but for Opacini, if you conserve Bionectria, there would not be a name change. If you go to Clonostachys, you need a name change. Same for Basicula. These two Capitata were described simultaneously, so no name change no matter what. Ochroleuca, if you conserved Bionectria, oh yes, you would need a name change because roseum is the oldest epithet. But if you went with Clonostachys, you would use Clonostachys rosea. Oh, and this brings up another issue. Oh no, never mind. But the next one brings up another issue. Name change required if Bionectria is conserved. Well, anyway, in summary, they're equal. The number of name changes is the same if you just count them up. There are 16, if we conserve Bionectria, there's 16 name changes. If we stick with the oldest name, Clonostachys, there's 16 name changes. So that's not very helpful. Oh. And, I'm teleomorphically oriented, anamorphically challenged, as Keith would say. So I would go with Bionectria, but I don't know if, I think that we should discuss, this is one for discussion. Okay, moving right along. Acromonium is based on Acromonium alternatum. And that corresponds to, based on Richard Somerville's article, corresponds to the genus Geosmithia. In this case, I didn't go through all the gyrations because the concept of acromonium has been so broadly conceived that when you do Google hits, it's really meaningless. And I think this is an argument for going with Geosmithia because the concept of acromonium is so broad. And that could be a subject for discussion. This is Stilbocrea and Stilbella, which some people think are the same, constitute a pair of genera. And so the first thing one needs to do is to see if the types really are congeneric. So the type of Stilbocrea is Macrostoma. The type of Stilbella is Erythrocephala, and Erythrocephala is a synonym of Fementaria, and Fementaria corresponds to Emerocellopsis. So therefore, Stilbocrea and the type of Stilbella are not congeneric, and so these two genera are not pairs of genera. So I think we always have to be careful and make sure we know what the types are. Hypocrea and Trichoderma. This is a fun one. The oldest name is Trichoderma. The first question, are they really a pair? Are they synonyms? And the answer is yes. The two types are congeneric. Looking at the number of names, Hypocrea has 476 names, so it's a big genus, lots of names. Trichoderma only 170, but look at the Google hits. So in this case, the number of names and the Google hits are in conflict. There has been a brief voting exercise, and the majority of the mycologists voted for Trichoderma. Hypocreopsis and Stromatocrea. Hypocreopsis is the oldest name. Hypomyces cladobatrum, they are congeneric. And in this case, looking at Google hits and number of species, Hypomyces, I would recommend conserving Hypomyces. This gets a little tedious, doesn't it? Calonectria and Cylindrocladium, there are more Calonectria names, but there are more Google hits for Cylindrocladium. And Nectria tubercularia is another example that's dear to my heart. Tubercularia, however, is an older name than Nectria. So this is a subject for discussion. Should we conserve Nectria? Yuri Hiroka has just finished a monograph and is now circumscribing the genus Nectria in a fairly narrow sense. But just looking at that circumscription of the genus Nectria, and that monograph, if we conserve Nectria, there would be relatively few name changes, and if we went with the principle of priority, tubercularia, there would be a lot of name changes. And of course, the Google hit approach isn't useful because the genus Nectria has been so broadly conceived. Oh, maybe I'll stop. Anyway, in summary for the Hypocreales, there are 5 genera that I would propose for conservation: Bionectria, Hypomyces, Nectria, Neonectria, and Spherostilbella. And then the genus Trichonectria, I guess it maybe would have to be approved by the General Committee. I don't know. Yesterday it sounded like if an anamorph genus was widely used, you didn't need to have it approved by the General Committee. Looking at the Diaporthales, one pair of genera is the genus Cryphonectria versus Indothiella. So these two genera are congeneric. Most species have been described in Cryphonectria, and fortunately, the species Cryphonectria parasitica, the cause of chestnut blight, would remain unchanged. And I can tell you the plant pathologists are quite happy about that. Diaporthifomopsis we discussed a little bit yesterday, and this is something that will need to be discussed further. The type of Diaporthi is Aries. The type of Phomopsis is Lactuci. Diaporthi is the older name. You can see that there are a few more names in Phomopsis, 979, than Diaporthi, where there's 826. But there are many more Google hits in both Google and Google Scholar. My sense is that Phomopsis is more commonly used by plant pathologists, But I don't know. I really think this is one where we have to discuss and decide. And then this example I put in because this is a case where I think this exercise will really help us straighten out our taxonomy. Looking at Dicarpella and Tubackia, digging into the genus Dicarpella, I found out that it's actually, that name is actually a later homonym for another name, so it probably never should have been used in the first place. So even though Tubackia is a much younger name, I think we should go with Tubackia. Well, we need to check out Dicarpella for sure to make sure that it really is a later homonym. But I think we would go with Tubackia. That certainly is the genus that is used by most plant pathologists, and you can see that in the Google and Google Scholar hits. Another one is Melanchonus melanconium. Melanconium is an older name than Melanchonus. The type of Melanchonus is Stilbostoma. The type of Melanconium is Alboatrum. Unfortunately, we don't really know what Melanconium is. The species Alboatrum has been not found very often, and the concept of Melanconium is not well defined. So I would argue for conserving Melanchonus. Valsa versus Cytospora, this is another might be contentious issue because Cytospora has priority. There are more Valsa names, 846 versus 560 for Cytospora. And if you do Google hits, you get zillions of them. But that's not because of the fungus, Valsa. It has to do with this thing called the Valsaver maneuver. So I think with Google hits, we really have to take some of these confounding factors into account, and it just can't be a wonderful subjective criterion that we use. Does anyone know what a Valsaver maneuver is? But anyway, it's obviously a lot of people do. So I would favor conserving Valsa. And then there's this other combination of pair of genera, Wisnia and Harknessia. And if you just look superficially in the literature, you'd think that these two were synonyms, but in fact they're not. The type of Wisnia, Xanthostroma, is not congeneric with the type of Harknessia. So you'll see in a recent paper by Pedro that we now have the Harknessiaceae, and he knew that already, that Wisnia was not a synonym of Harknessia. So right now we don't have a generic name for the sexual species of Harknessia, and we don't need one. So Harknessia is a good genus. So in the Diaporthales, and let me say that these are not thorough studies, the genera I would recommend for conserving are Phomopsis, Melanchonus, Tubackia, and Valsa. Two of those names are anamorphic names, and maybe if we decided to go with those anamorphic names, they would have to be approved by the General Committee. And finally, just since I have the podium, I just thought briefly about the rust fungi. The rust fungi are a mess in terms of trying to get to one name. The anamorphic names have never been very well conceived. Of course, there are anamorphic names, Uredo and Asidium. But I think in that group of fungi in particular, we will need to favor the teleomorph. And then I think this has already been discussed, at least I've discussed it with a number of people, just conserving the name of Venturia inequalis. I think that is such a widely known name that we should try to conserve it. So in summary, I think as a group of mycologists, we need to decide which genera and species to conserve. I think that there's a lot of grunt work ahead of us. I think, you just have to knuckle down, look at the dates, look at the type, try to figure out what the type is. And it is grunt work. It's not really that exciting, to tell you the truth, in putting this talk together. But I think we should get on with it, that the starting date, the 1st of January, is right around the corner. And I think that in 20 years, we'll be very pleased that we have come as far as we have, and that using one name will really will really move our science forward and help people understand the relationships among fungi.